November 14th, 2010. Somewhere between 3 and 5 in the morning, a Mexican Navy patrol reaches a ranch 15 kilometers outside Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas. The house is still breathing smoke. Every window is gone. Whole sections of wall have been chewed into lattice by automatic fire. Outside, in the dirt, 4 Los Zetas operatives are dead. 2 more bleeding out in the road, abandoned by their own convoy. The Marines stack at the entrance. Inside, rifles staged at every window, ammunition boxes opened, emptied, stacked. There should be a squad in here, but there is only one body, a 77-year-old man in blue pajamas. 2 bullet wounds. His rifle is within arm's reach. Not a soldier, a grandfather. Los Zetas gave him 24 hours to leave. He used them to turn his home into a trap no trained gunman could crack. 900 rounds were fired at this house. The convoy that fired them retreated. How does a grandfather force Los Zetas to abandon their own operation? And what did he build in those final 24 hours that made a paramilitary convoy run? Allende, Nuevo León. Hill country where the timber trade set the rhythm of every family that worked it. Alejo Garza Tamez grew up around sawmills. His father ran one. That meant breakfast, school fees, and survival all depended on straight cuts and sharp blades. Waste a board, lose a day's margin. A dull saw didn't just slow the work, it bled money. By the time Alejo was old enough to carry lumber, he already understood a principle he would carry to his last night alive. Nothing gets wasted. Not material, not time, not a single round of ammunition. Years later in Monterrey, he and his brothers built a timber business called El Salto. The name traced the routes they traveled for lumber, deals negotiated by handshake across the northern Sierra. In that part of Mexico, reputation functioned as currency. You spent decades earning it. You didn't burn it on carelessness. That is the first piece. The second is quieter, and it hides in plain sight. Alejo hunted. Not as a weekend hobby or a photo opportunity. Hunting is where he calibrated himself. He learned what true stillness felt like, how long a body could hold position without twitching a single muscle. He learned that pulling the trigger was the last 5% of the job. The other 95% was reading terrain, calculating wind, and waiting until the geometry was perfect. Over decades, the hunter became a collector. Sporting rifles for deer, shotguns for birds, each weapon is cleaned, maintained, registered through Mexico's strict federal permit system. In a country where firearm ownership required layers of paperwork, signatures, and government approval, Alejo passed through that system again and again. Because to him, a tool was not a toy. It was an extension of discipline. Third piece. In May 1976, Alejo bought land in Tamaulipas, not in a city, not where neighbors could see your fence line. He bought Rancho San Jose, roughly 3,000 hectares of brush country with cattle, crops, and a reservoir nearby where families fished. Why would a successful businessman want a lonely ranch hours from home? Because a ranch is proof. Proof you can turn empty scrubland into something that feeds people, holds water, raises animals, and becomes a world with its own roads, corrals, shaded palapas, and hunting blinds. Weekdays in Monterrey, weekends on the land. That became the rhythm. His wife, Leticia, knew it. His daughters, Marcela and Alejandra, grew up inside it. A ranch worker named Joaquin Estrada kept the place running between visits, knowing every fence post and water line like a second skin. So when later headlines described Alejo as a lonely old cowboy with nothing left to lose, that description was wrong. He had a wife who expected his call every morning. He had daughters. He had employees who depended on his payroll. He had 34 years of labor sunk into that soil. This distinction matters because it changes the meaning of everything that follows. If you are alone and broken, a last stand is desperation. If you are surrounded by a life you built with your hands, a last stand is a decision. By 2010, Alejo was 77 and still sharp. Still the kind of man who shaved and dressed properly because the day deserved that much. And then the world outside the ranch began to rot. The road from Monterrey down towards Ciudad Victoria used to be a family drive to the coast. Citrus stands, cheese stops, a slow weekend. Now it was a corridor of missing people and whispered warnings. Ranchers abandoned properties to stay alive. Some paid monthly protection fees. Some watched their land get occupied and converted into cartel training camps. In Tamaulipas, the economy carried a new tax that appeared on no-receipt fear. Alejo saw all of it, heard the stories, and watched the silence spread like a stain across the region. And he kept driving back to San Jose every weekend, because men like him did not leave projects unfinished. Then, one autumn weekend, the project came due. A convoy of pickup trucks turned onto his road. Men stepped out to deliver a message every rancher in the region already understood. You have 24 hours to disappear. What happens when the one man who never learned to waste anything decides he is not going to waste his life's work either? And what kind of enemy had just made the worst miscalculation of their careers? Los Zetas were not born the way most cartels are born. Most criminal organizations start as smugglers. They get rich. Then they get violent. Los Zetas reversed the sequence. They started as violence itself. In the late 1990s, the Gulf Cartel began recruiting directly from the Mexican military men trained in the Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales, Mexico's elite special operations unit. These were soldiers who understood small unit tactics, encrypted communications, ambush doctrine, and counterintelligence. A force built to protect the state became a force that rented its skills to whoever paid the most. At first, they served as bodyguards. Then they evolved into something far worse, a paramilitary organization with a business model. Their founders used radio call signs as names Z1, Z2, Z3, as if the alphabet itself were a rank structure. And their operational doctrine did not come from gangster cinema. It came from psychological warfare manuals. Frighten the enemy enough, and you defeat him without fighting. That sentence sounds like a colonel's briefing. In Tamaulipas, it became something a civilian heard at his own front gate. Los Zetas treated territory like a military grid. They mapped nodes, routes, choke points, and safe houses. If you were a rancher, you were not a person. You were a location. And if you were unlucky, your front gate became their next outpost. By the mid-2000s, the Northeast began to transform. Roads that once felt ordinary started to feel watched. Then, around 2006, open warfare between rival factions turned highways and border cities into contested battle space. Nuevo Laredo, Reynosa, Matamoros, names that used to mean commerce and crossing. Now they meant unmarked checkpoints, convoys without license plates, and gunfire you told yourself was fireworks because the lie let you sleep. You did not have to be on the cartel's payroll to serve them. You just had to be terrified enough to stay quiet. That is how an entire region becomes a black hole. People vanish, and the absence swallows the story. Los Zetas diversified beyond drug trafficking into extortion, kidnapping, and taxation of other criminals. They did not replace the drug trade, they layered on top of it. In some communities, the most reliable revenue stream was not cocaine. It was a fear of a monthly payment plan, scalable, predictable, franchise-ready. By 2010, anyone with land outside Ciudad Victoria knew the routine. A group arrives. They do not knock. They do not negotiate. They inform. Sometimes they demand a monthly fee. Sometimes they skip the pretense entirely, occupy the property, and expect the owner to evaporate without a word. Which means the ultimatum delivered to Alejo Garza Tamez at Rancho San Jose was not a unique tragedy. It was Tuesday. The men who approached him in November 2010 were running a play they had executed dozens of times across Tamaulipas. Rancher after rancher had folded. They expected the same ending. You pack, you leave. You do not call the police, because the police do not come. You do not call a journalist, because the journalist does not publish. You do not fight, because fighting is how your whole family gets erased. The cartel's scouts looked at Alejo and saw the easiest version of the job. 77 years old, alone, a rancher, not a Marine, a weekend house, not a bunker. They gave him 24 hours because they considered themselves generous, because they had never been wrong before. If you are thinking you would have driven away in 5 minutes, that is the rational move. But rationality assumes you have somewhere safe to go, something the cartel has not already marked, and a future where the next convoy does not find you anyway. The trucks drove away, confident, and Alejo was left with the most dangerous thing a threatened man can possess: time. If you want more true stories where a single decision rewrites the ending, hit subscribe now, because this story does not have a safe place to stop. 24 hours. One day to find out what kind of person you are when the world stops pretending your values are symbolic. So what does a 77-year-old hunter do with one day in a house full of rifles? And why is his first move not violence, but something far more unsettling? The trucks vanished down the ranch road. Dust settled. The property went quiet in a way that felt staged, like the air itself was holding its breath. Alejo stood alone with a clock. 24 hours to erase himself from the land he had built for 34 years. Consider the math in your own house for a moment. Not the heroic version, the practical one. Who do you call? Local police? The cartel had already paid them, threatened them, or replaced them. State authorities? Paperwork does not travel faster than a bullet. The military? Maybe, but maybe, is not a plan when a convoy has promised to return before dawn. Alejo understood something most people refuse to accept until it is too late. There was no cavalry. There was no plan B waiting behind a phone call. There was only what he did with the time he had and how he chose to spend it. His first move was not violence. It was responsibility. He gathered his ranch workers, the men who fed cattle, repaired fences, and kept the property running in his absence. He paid them. He told them to leave. Not tomorrow. Now. Take your families. Do not come back. He did not recruit them into his war. He removed them from it. Because if you are going to lose a fight, you do not use other people as sandbags. Then he made one more call. To Leticia. Hours before the attack, he spoke like he always spoke. He asked about Marcela and Alejandra. He did not say the cartel had threatened him. He did not say he was staying. He did not ask permission for what he had already decided. He dropped one sentence into the conversation like a stone into still water. A simple declaration of love. Not dramatic, not coded. Just the kind of thing a man says when he has already made peace with what comes next. She answered the way a person answers when she does not know the universe is about to crack open. The call ended, and the quiet grew heavier. Because that sentence was not romance. It was a goodbye stripped of the word goodbye. So how did Leticia find out the truth? And what did the silence of the next morning sound like when his usual call never came? Now came the part that made the Marines stare at the evidence hours later and ask a single word: how? Alejo went to his weapons, his hunting rifles, his shotguns, the tools of decades of field work. He did not grab one and pace the hallway like a film character waiting for his close-up. He worked, window by window, door by door, rifle placed here. An ammunition box was placed there, then another position, then another. He built a circuit inside his own home, a series of firing stations he could rotate between, each one covering a different angle of approach. Not because he expected to win a firefight against a paramilitary convoy, because he intended to deny the objective. Los Zetas wanted the ranch, the land, the house as a symbol and a trophy. Alejo wanted them to leave without it. So he prepared like what he was, a man who had spent his entire life understanding angles, patience, and the geometry of a clean shot. A hunter's home became a trap, and here is a detail that seems small until it haunts the ending. Alejo did not put on boots. He did not dress for combat. He did not need a uniform to know what he was doing. When the official photos were taken hours later, he was wearing blue pajamas. Because this was not a performance. This was his actual life, playing out in the clothes he slept in. Night dropped over Tamaulipas. The ranch went still. Somewhere in the darkness, men were loading magazines and checking grenade pins, laughing because they believed this was routine, because they believed nobody fights back, and Alejo sat inside a house full of staged rifles, listening to the silence like it was the last thing he would ever own. Between 3 and 5 in the morning, the The sound arrived. Engines. More than one. Getting closer. Headlights swept across the dirt road, turning mesquite trees into moving shadows. The convoy was back, right on schedule, and Alejo Garza Tamez was exactly where he said he would be, in the dark, waiting. The men outside believed they were about to collect a ranch. What they were walking into was a lifetime of preparation snapping shut like a jaw. And when the first shot cracked from inside the house, who flinched, the old man or the paramilitary? The convoy stopped in front of the house like it owned the night. Pickup trucks, engines idling, doors swinging open, boots crunching gravel, men fanned out with rifles held loose. Casual, because this was supposed to be an eviction, not a battle. They announced themselves with gunfire into the air. A ritual, a warning. Come out, hand it over, make it easy. No police siren answered. Instead, a single crack rang from inside the house. Then another. 2 attackers dropped in the darkness before they could process the idea that the ranch was occupied and hostile. This was the second the entire operation fractured. Los Zetas were trained to assault positions, to overwhelm, to intimidate. They were not trained to be hunted. The convoy reacts the only way a convoy reacts when it meets unexpected resistance. They unloaded. Automatic fire ripped into the house. Rounds chewed through wood, plaster, and glass. The walls began to dissolve. Ballistic reports later tallied nearly 900 spent casings fired at the structure from 5 different weapon types. 900 rounds directed at a single building. That is not a firefight. That is demolition. But Alejo was not standing in a window waiting to become a silhouette. He moved, position to position, rifle to rifle, and that is where the hunter became terrifying. A hunter does not shoot where the target is standing. He shoots where the target is about to step. Alejo rotated to another station, grabbed a fresh rifle, and fired. A third attacker collapsed, then a fourth. The men outside began yelling orders. They shifted angles. They tried to find a line of sight through the smoke and dust, but every angle they chose had already been considered by the man inside the man who had spent 24 hours mapping exactly this scenario. They tried to breach. They pushed toward the doors. That is when the house revealed what Alejo had built during those final hours. Every entry point was covered. Every approach was exposed. They were not storming a home. They were walking into a geometry of discipline. So Los Zetas escalated. Grenades. Explosions punched through the structure. White flashes lit the brush for hundreds of meters. Shrapnel tore through walls. Smoke filled every room. The ranch house Alejo had spent decades improving was being demolished in minutes, as if the cartel were trying to erase the idea that a civilian could say no. Through that chaos, he kept firing. Not like a man chasing glory. Like a man buying seconds. Like a man making them pay for every inch of ground. At some point, the attackers reached the back of the house, near the doorway leading to the bathroom. Alejo took 2 bullets. One to the chest, one to the head. It ended there, but listen carefully. The objective was never to kill the old man. The objective was to take the ranch, and that objective failed. When the gunfire died, Los Zetas did something they almost never did. They pulled back. They loaded up. They retreated into the dark. They abandoned their dead. They abandoned their wounded. They abandoned pride. Because the longer they stayed, the closer the Navy patrols got. And because for the first time in a long time, the cost calculation inverted. One old man had made this too expensive. If you are a cartel soldier in 2010 Tamaulipas, you are used to civilians folding. Tonight, a civilian made you bleed. By morning, when the Marines arrived, the scene looked unreal. A house reduced to ruins. Weapons staged like a one-man armory. The body of Alejo Garza Tamez near the bathroom doorway, in blue pajamas, surrounded by firearms and emptied ammunition boxes. Outside, proof the cartel had not walked away clean. 4 dead, 2 wounded, and not a single other defender anywhere on the property. The Marines searched room after room expecting to find a team. They found one man, a lifetime, and a decision. If the cartel came to take the ranch and left without it, what exactly did Alejo win? Because the day after the gunfire, his real battle was not on the ranch floor. It was in the silence that followed. And in Tamaulipas, silence could be more lethal than bullets. So does this story die on this property, or does it escape? Here is what you would expect after a story like this. Headlines within hours, a manhunt, arrests, the state showing up late but loudly, claiming the victory as part of the plan. None of that happened. In the days after the firefight, Tamaulipas stayed quiet. Not because nothing had occurred, because saying what happened was dangerous. Los Zetas built their empire on fear, and the last thing that empire needed was a legend proving a civilian with courage and good aim could bleed them. So the first battle Alejo won was invisible, the battle over whether anyone would speak his name at all. Silence broke anyway. About a week later, Milenio, a newspaper based in Monterrey, published the story. And suddenly the country had a word for the feeling it had been swallowing for years. Relief. Not relief that violence existed. Relief that, for once, violence did not get everything it wanted. Alejo became more than a victim. He became an answer to a question millions had been afraid to ask out loud: what happens when just one person refuses? The legend grew, because Mexico has deep roots in oral tradition. Corridos narrative ballads traveled faster than any official report. Writers circled the story because the premise was too clean to ignore. Then the echoes reached Hollywood. Not officially, not politely. The way stories slip across borders and lodge in a screenwriter's subconscious. Maybe inspiration, maybe coincidence, maybe reality simply writes tighter third acts than studios do. There is even a documentary that went looking for the man behind the myth. But the strangest part is not how quickly culture adopted the story. It is how little the state did with it. Years later, journalist Diego Enrique Osorno gained access to the official case file. What he found was almost insulting. Fewer than 200 pages. Ballistics, forensics, copies of Alejo's legal firearm permits, then nothing. No suspect interrogations, no witnesses called, no real investigation. 8 years after the most talked about killing in that corner of the country, the file sat closed as if someone had already decided who owned the truth. Los Zetas could kill a man, but they could not force the state to care. And that vacuum is exactly why people kept telling the story themselves. The story kept accumulating details that refused to die. Alejo called Leticia hours before the attack, her waiting for his usual morning call the next day, dialing again and again, hearing nothing. Joaquin Estrada, the last known person to see Alejo alive, walking into the aftermath, and one detail that outlived them all. Before that final weekend, Alejo had brought home a rose bush in a plastic bag, smiling as he told Leticia it was not one rose, it was many. After his funeral, she planted it. Years later, she and their daughters took cuttings back to the ranch, pressing living roots into the soil Los Zetas had failed to steal. Los Zetas arrived at Rancho San Jose to take it. They left without it. They left bodies in the dirt and a story they could never unmake. And time did what time always does to empires built on terror. Leaders got killed, others got captured. The organization fractured into scraps. But the ranch owner in blue pajamas stayed one coherent thing, a man who decided the outcome before the first shot was fired. When you circle back to that opening scene, the Marines standing in a wrecked house with rifles staged in every direction, the meaning sharpens. Alejo does not survive, but he denies the objective. He teaches a cartel something it cannot afford to learn, that a civilian can be more dangerous than a convoy if the civilian is fighting for a life instead of a paycheck. He loses his life. He keeps his meaning. Los Zetas won battles with fear. He won one night with refusal. Somewhere right now, another convoy is turning onto another road, betting nobody will say no. Alejo already answered for himself. The rest is up to everyone else. If you want to see how one man's fake software nearly convinced the US government to shoot down passenger planes after 9/11 and why they buried it instead of prosecuting him, click here.